No, you're coming to some serious conclusions for a guy that has zero intelligence, Jim.
Yeah, you were just quoting Sean Hannity there. The House and Senate Intelligence Committees are
I also
quoting
quoted, I get you're going to cherry pick.
FBI director, you're citing Sean Hannity.
No, okay. You also look over. You also tend to overlook all of the other sources because I know you want to cherry pick it. But but you do. But where was your concern about the New York Times reporting? You didn't seem to have a concern with that.
We have done plenty of reporting on all of this.
No, but you want to cherry pick one
commentary,
one piece of commentary.
Associates of the president to the Russians, that has all been looked at. And
no, wait. How do you know all this? How do you seem to be such an expert in this?
I'm saying that this has been looked at, Sean.
How do you know it's been looked at? Hold on. Where is? I'm sorry. I'm afraid to understand. Where can you tell me how you know that all of this is quote been looked at?
You're asking me whether
you made a statement. You said quote. All of this has been looked at.
Other outlets have reported.
No. So okay. So we're supposed. So when your outlet says it's all been looked at,
the president and the Russians during the 2016 campaign, it sounds like during the context of that investigation, there might have been some intercepted communications. The House Intelligence Committee chairman did mention that, and we have reported that. Others have reported that on our air and various publications. But Sean, what you are refusing to answer, the question that you're refusing to answer is whether or not the president still believes what he believes.
No, I'm not refusing. I just said it to Jonathan. I didn't refuse to answer that.
You have a Senate and House Intelligence Committee, both leaders from both parties on both of those panels saying that they don't see any evidence of any wiretapping. So how can the president go on and continue to say
Because that's not because you're mischaracterizing what Chairman Nunez said. He said, quote, I think it's possible he's following up on this. So to suggest that is actually, and you're stating unequivocally that you somehow...
Literally, he said if you take the
right, and I think that we've already cleared that up. And he said exactly that, but the president has already said clearly when he referred to wiretapping, he was referring to surveillance. So that's...
But it sounds like, Sean, that
okay.
you and the president are saying now, well, we don't mean wiretapping anymore,
no,
because that's not true anymore. So now we're going to explain
that's not
other forms of surveillance. What's it going to be next?
No, Jim, I think that's cute, but at the end of the day, we've talked about this for 3 or 4 days. What the president had the quote wiretapping in quotes. He was referring to broad surveillance, and now you're basically going back. We talked about this several days ago. The bottom line is that the investigation by the House and the Senate has not been provided all of the information. And when it does, but where was the concern? Hold on, I just
reports, not evidence.
No. What I think the president addressed that last night and said there's more to come. These are merely pointing out that I think there's widespread reporting that throughout the 2016 election there was surveillance that was done on a variety of people that came up.
No,
how do you, Jim? I find it interesting that you somehow believe that you.
Of course, they're going to be looking at these various things.
Okay, I get it. Somehow. You seem to believe that you have all of this information. You've been read in on all of these things, which I find very interesting.
I have been read in by the FBI.
On Fox News on March 14th, Judge Andrew Napolitano made the following statement, quote, 3 intelligence sources have informed Fox News that President Obama went outside the chain of command. He didn't use the NSA, he didn't use the CIA, he didn't use the FBI, and he didn't use the Department of Justice. He used GCHQ. What is that? It's the initials for the British intelligence spying agency. So simply by having 2 people saying to them, President needs transcripts of conversations involving candidate Trump's conversations involving President-elect Trump, he's able to get it, and there's no American fingerprints on this.
I'm sure you have now seen the Senate Intelligence Committee has said they see no indications Trump Tower was the subject of surveillance. That seems to be a pretty blanket statement. What's your reaction?
Well, I think there's several things. I would also, it's interesting to me that, just as a point of interest, that when one entity says one thing that claims one thing, you guys cover it ad nauseum. When Devin Nunes came out and said, I think it's very possible yesterday, there was crickets from you guys. When Devin Nunes came out and said there was no connection that he saw to Russia, crickets. When Tom Cotton said the same, you don't want to cover the stuff. No, hold on.
No evidence of wiretapping at Trump Tower. So now you've had the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Actually, here's his quote, Jonathan. No, here's the direct quote. I think it's very possible, end quote. That's what he said when he said the president's communications could have been swept up in collection. So again,
I saw no indication of wiretapping.
I understand that, and I think the president's been very clear when he talked about this, and he talked about it last night. When he talked about wiretapping, he meant surveillance. and that there have been incidents that have occurred. Devin Nunes couldn't have stated it more beautifully. But you choose not to cover that part. You chose not to cover when Tom Cotton went out, when Richard Burr went out, when others, Chairman Nunes and others, and said that there was no. Hold on. I understand that, Jonathan. And where was your passion and where was your concern when they all said that there was no connection to Russia? Where was it then? You crickets from you guys, because at the end of the day, when the, no, hold on. I'm making a point. The point is this: number one, that it's interesting how when evidence comes out and people who have been briefed on the Russia connection come out and say that there was nothing that they have seen that proves a connection, you choose not to cover that. You don't stop the narrative. You continue to perpetuate a false narrative. When he came out yesterday and said, "quote, I see no evidence that this happened," when he said, "quote, I think it's very possible, but like I said, we should know later," you don't cover that part. You only cover the part that this is. But let's go through what we do know, okay? Hold on. Let me, and I'm trying to answer your question, Jonathan, if you can calm down. If you look at what the New York Times reported on January 12th, 2017, they said, quote, in its final days, the Obama administration has expanded the power of the National Security Agency to share globally intercepted personal communications with the government's 16 other intelligence agencies before applying privacy protections. The new rules significantly relax long-standing limits on what the NSA may do with the information gathered by its most powerful surveillance operation, which are largely unregulated by wiretapping laws. When Sarah Carter reported that by the start of the new year brought with it unexpected politicizing of the intelligence gathered in secret. Separately, the Obama administration amended a long-standing executive order allowing information intercepted through FISA warrants or by the National Security Agency to be shared by a wider audience in 16 government agencies as Obama was leaving offices. Intelligence normally reserved for just a handful of intelligence leaders was spread throughout briefings to scores of workers, and soon leaks began appearing in news media organizations, often in stories lacking context of how national security investigations are actually concluded. On March 3rd, Fox News chief anchor Bret Baier said the following, quote, there's a report in June 2016, a FISA request by the Obama administration forwarded intelligence surveillance court to monitor communications involving Donald Trump and several other campaign officials. Then they got turned down, then in October. Then they renewed it and do a startup wiretap at Trump Tower with some computer and Russian banks. Baier continues, a June FISA request that foreign intelligence surveillance courts get shot down. A judge says, hold on, Jonathan, you can ask, you can follow up. A judge says no go to monitoring Trump Tower. They go back in October. They do get a FISA granted. This is wiretap going on in a monitoring of computers that is sometimes, they believe, to a Russian counts. By all accounts, they don't come up with anything in the investigation, but the investigation continues, and we don't know it. On November 11th, 2016, days after the election, Heat Street reported, quote, two separate sources with links to the counterintelligence community had confirmed to Heat Street that the FBI sought and was granted a FISA warrant in October, giving counter-surveillance intelligence permission to examine the activities of U.S. persons in Donald Trump's campaign with ties to Russia. The first request, which sources say named Trump, was denied back in June, but the second was drawn more narrowly and granted in October after evidence was presented of a server, possibly related to the Trump campaign and its alleged links to two banks, SVB Bank and Russia's Alpha Bank. Sources suggest that a FISA warrant was granted to look at the full context of related documents that concern U.S. person. Two separate sources with links to the counterintelligence community have confirmed that the FBI sought and was granted a FISA warrant in October, giving counterintelligence permission to examine the activities of U.S. persons in Donald Trump's campaign with ties to Russia. They go on. The FISA warrant was granted in connection with the investigation of suspected activities between the server and two banks. However, it is thought that the intelligence community that the warrant covers any U.S. person connected to this UN investigation, and thus covers Donald Trump and at least three further men who have either formed part of his campaign or acted as media surrogates. On January 19th, the New York Times reported the following. American law enforcement and intelligence agencies are examining intercepted communication and financial transactions as part of a broad investigation of possible leaks between Russian officials and associates of President-elect Donald J. Trump. One official said intelligence reports based on some of the wiretapped communications have been provided to the White House. It is unclear which Russian officials under investigation or what particular conversations caught the attention of American eavesdroppers. The legal standard for opening these investigations is low. Andy McCarthy, writing in National Review, suggested, quote, from three reports from The Guardian, Heat Street, and the New York Times, it appears the FBI has concerns about a private server in Trump Tower that was connected to one or two Russian banks. Heat Street describes these concerns as centering on, quote, possible financial and banking offenses. This is his quote, I italicized the word offenses because it denotes crimes. Ordinarily, when crimes are suspected, there is a criminal investigation, not a national security investigation. We go on. Sarah Carter from Circa reporting, intelligence professionals tell Circa News they were concerned that some of the Russian intelligence was spread through group briefings to a much larger than usual audience back in January. This would have happened during the final days of the Obama administration when it expanded Executive Order 12333, which allows employees with a, quote, need to know have further unfettered access to raw data stored by the NSA. The new rules allowed the NSA to share, quote, raw signals intelligence information, including the names of those involved in phone conversations and emails. The expansion of the order makes it difficult to narrow in on the leaks, and frankly, it allows too many people access to the raw data, which only used to be available to a select few, said a U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity and was not granted to speak on the authority. Numerous outlets, including the New York Times, have reported on the FBI investigation into Mr. Trump's advisors. BBC and then McClatchy revealed the existence of a multi-agency working group to coordinate investigations across the thing. On February 14th, the New York Times again refers to phone records and intercepted calls. Let me quote them. American Law Enforcement Intelligence Agency intercepted the communications around the same time they were discovering the evidence that Russia was trying to disrupt the presidential election by hacking into the Democratic National Committee, 3 officials said. The intelligence agencies then thought to learn whether the Trump campaign was colluding with the Russians on hacking or other efforts to influence the election. The officials interviewed in recent weeks said that so far they have seen no evidence of such cooperation. The officials said that the intercepted communications were not limited to Trump campaign officials and other associates of Mr. Trump. The call logs and intercepted communications are part of a larger trove of information that the FBI is sifting through. Days later, the New York Times then reports, quote, in the Obama administration's last days, some White House officials scrambled to spread information about Russian efforts to undermine the presidential election of Donald Trump, connections between the president-elect and Russians across the government. But the increasingly hard-to-escape conclusion that that individuals in our government were instead trying to undermine the new president by saying, quote, and this is the New York Times again, at intelligence agencies there was a push to process as much raw intelligence into possible analysis to keep the report at relatively low classification levels to ensure a widespread readership across the government, and in some cases, quote, among them European allies. This allowed the upload of as much intelligence as possible to Intellipedia, a secret wiki used by American analysis to share information. Sean Hannity went on Fox to say, quote, but protections which are known as minimization procedures have been put in place to protect Americans that are not under warrant, American citizens that are caught up in their surveillance. And, quote, by the way, their identities are protected. Their constitutional rights are protected. Now, of course, this was not the case with Lieutenant General Flynn because a transcript of his call was created and then given to intelligence officials who then leaked this information, which is a felony, to the press that printed it, end quote.
So, Sean, are you saying that despite the findings, the bipartisan findings of the Senate Intelligence Committee?
No, they're not findings. There's a statement out today. They have not begun this. As you know, yesterday, or 2 days ago, the Department of Justice asked for an additional week. So the statement clearly says that at this time, that they don't believe that. They have yet to go through the information. The Department of Justice, as you know, has not supplied this. But I've just read off to you. It's interesting. When the New York Times reports... Hold on.
Let you do that whole long answer.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. So are you saying that the president still stands by his allegation that President Obama ordered wiretapping or surveillance of Trump Tower, despite the fact that the Senate Intelligence Committee says they see no indication that it happened? Does the president still stand by the
first of all, he stands by it, but again, you're mischaracterizing what happened today.
No,
the Senate, I know,
exactly from their statement.
I understand that, and at the same time, they acknowledge that they have not been in contact with the Department of Justice. So, but again, I go back to what I said at the beginning. It's interesting. Hold on. It's interesting how, at the same time, where were you coming to the defense of that same Intelligence Committee and those members when they said there was no connection to Russia? You didn't seem to report it then. There was no. So you want, hold on, you want to comment and you want to perpetuate a false narrative.
Actually, I did report that Clapper said that.
But when those individuals have gone out time and time again, when Chairman Nunes has said, number one, that there was no information that he's aware of that existed, that got zero reporting. Number two, when he went out yesterday and said, quote, I think it's very possible, you don't include that in the question mark. The bottom line is that the President said last night that he will be providing, that there would be additional information coming forward. There's a ton of media reports out there that indicate that something was going on during the 26th election. And I think it's interesting, where was the questioning of the New York Times or these other outlets when that was going on?
Give me some credit.
I'll give you some.
A little intelligence, maybe. But no,
Clearance.
what I'm saying is that
I wasn't done. Clearance.
those two panels.
Maybe both.
Well, come on. Those two panels have spoken with the FBI director, and
I understand
there's
that.
no evidence of this.
Okay, I think this question's been asked and answered, Jim.
This farce and just have the president say
it's
he was
interesting
wrong.
how you jump to all of these conclusions about what they have, what they don't have, and you seem to know all the answers. But at the end of the day, there was clearly a ton of reporting. Hold on, Jim, let me answer. No, I think that there's been a vast amount of reporting, which I just detailed, about activity that was going on in the 2016 election. There's no question that there were surveillance techniques used throughout this. I think by a variety of outlets that have reported this activity concluded. So, and I think when you actually ask those two people whether or not, and as Chairman Nunes says yesterday, when you take it literally in wiretapping, the President's already been very clear that he didn't mean specifically wiretapping, he had it in quotes. So I think to fall back on that is a false premise. That's not what he said. He was very clear about that when he talked about it yesterday. Major.
Okay, Sean, so just to be clear, you're good and the President's good with stories that have anonymous sources in them.
No, it's interesting. I think it's when it comes to the Russia story and the on-the-record sources who have been briefed by the FBI continue to conclude that there's nothing there. You guys continue to fall back on these anonymous sources and perpetuate a false narrative. And yet, when it comes to us talking about all these reports in there, you then criticize anonymous sources. No, it's just interesting, the sort of the double standard that exists when it comes to us citing stories, when it comes to, and then how you intend to use them.
So let me ask you what the President said last night. He was asked by Tucker Carlson, you're in charge of the various intelligence apparatus that report to you. You can
Right.
ask them. And
You
he said
can,
he was
and you would be
no,
getting in the middle.
Can I ask my
Yeah.
question? He said he was reluctant to do that. So let
Right.
me just put two things together. Earlier this week you told us when asked, has the President directed the Justice Department to collect and distribute information to the various relevant congressional committees? If I remember your answer correctly, it was no, he hadn't
That's right.
given that specific direction. Has that changed? Has he now directed
No.
the Justice Department? And is he asking himself for the intelligence agencies that report to him to provide him specific answers to these underlying questions that are separate from the
No.
reportage you're citing?
No.
Why not?
Because I think we've covered this before. I think that gets into interfering in this, and I think that the appropriate process is to allow the House and the Senate to do this so that it doesn't appear as though we're interfering. I understand that. But as I mentioned to you this the other day, Major, if we go ask them, then you're going to turn around and say, you guys interfered with something and you pressure them. It's a catch-22 for us. And the bottom line is that I think the President made it clear 2 Sundays ago that he wanted the House and the Senate Intelligence Committee to work with these agencies to collect the information and make a report. That's what we're doing in order to make sure that there's a separation from us so that you can't turn around and then accuse us of forcing or pressuring an agency to produce a document. We're asking them to go through the process of the separation of powers and actually going to those different entities. The Department of Justice said yesterday they want an additional week, and we're allowing that process to play through.
Judge Napolitano says even if the president, former President Barack Obama, his White House did spy on this president, there may never be a way to prove it. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. Here to explain, Fox News judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, what do you mean he can't prove it? I thought he could prove everything. We have all the American surveillance and technology at our fingertips.
Okay, so the statutes authorize the President of the United States to order the surveillance of any person in the United States of America without suspicion, without probable cause, and without a warrant, meaning he doesn't have to go to a court to do it. So he can order the NSA, which already has the digital version of our phone calls, to transcribe the digital version into a transcript and give it to him. But if he does that, there's a record of the order.
Right.
So 3 intelligence sources have informed Fox News that President Obama went outside the chain of command. He didn't use the NSA, he didn't use the CIA, he didn't use the FBI, and he didn't use the Department of Justice. He used GCHQ, What the heck is GCHQ? That's the initials for the British spying agency. They have 24/7 access to the NSA database. So by simply having two people go to them saying, President Obama needs transcripts of conversations involving candidate Trump, conversations involving President-elect Trump, he's able to get it. And there's no American fingerprints on this.
So you're saying that the British used their version of the CIA to wiretap Donald Trump's phone or
Well,
tower?
it's not a wiretap. The concept of plugging a wire into a phone box in the basement of a building is what the law was when these statutes were written in 1978. Everything is done electronically now via computer. The NSA has 24/7, 365 access to every mainframe computer of every telecom and every computer service provider that does business in the United States. And they share that with various intelligence agencies, including the Brits. So the British intelligence agency had this. What happened to the guy who ordered this? Resigned.
Does the government work for us or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say, and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against yourself simply by labeling you a domestic terrorist? What if the government could torture you until you said what the government wanted to hear? What if people running for president actually supported torture? What if the government tortured your children to get to you? What if government judges and government lawyers intimidated juries into convicting the innocent? What if the government could send you to your death and your innocence meant nothing so long as the government's procedures were followed? What if America's prison population, the largest in the world, was a cruel and unusual way for a country to be free? What if half the prison population never harmed anyone but themselves? What if the people had no rights except those the government chose to let them have? What if the states had no rights except to do as the federal government commanded? What if our elected officials didn't really live among us, but instead all had their hearts and homes in Washington, D.C.? What if the government could strip you of your rights because of where your mother was when you were born? What if the income tax was unconstitutional? What if the states were convinced to give up their representation in Congress? What if the government tried to ban you from using a substance in your body that is older than the government itself? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if I'm right? What if the government is wrong? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?